I have consumed way too much Doom. Since returning in April to play the DLC and begin capturing footage for these edits, I have logged another 50 hours of playtime, and in that time, it's really cemented my belief that Doom Eternal has essentially perfected its formula and is easily one of the most engaging titles I've ever played, easily deserving of all of its praise and much more. There isn't much that remains to be said about Doom Eternal's combat loop by now, and personally, I've never felt more alive than when I'm stabbing a marauder in the face. Sadly, I do have to admit, I've only just been able to complete Doom Eternal on regular nightmare difficulty, and even that felt like pushing shit uphill with a rubber fork. Look up cathartic in the dictionary and you'll find a picture of the chainsaw. Doom Eternal has real, intuitive play that rewards you for mastering a combat loop that's been expertly engineered to maximize a state of flow, with an unrelenting pace that will force you to think on your feet or fail. It's a chaotic dance, almost comparable to a puzzle game, if the puzzle had you riding a unicycle whilst axe juggling, each area presenting a different combination of challenges that forces you to constantly adapt your approach. At its peak, once you're familiar with all the tools and techniques at your disposal, Doom Eternal manages to nearly perfectly balance itself on the scale between anxiety and relaxation. Never dull, but never too difficult. It should be engaging enough to never be too easy or boring, and never too difficult so as to be frustrating. But that's not really what I wanted to discuss here. The combat, the gameplay loop, these aspects of Doom are all well understood by now and have been dissected and analysed by people far more qualified and interesting than me. So I wanted to briefly talk about an aspect that I think gets marginally overlooked in Doom that I really came to appreciate in my recent playthrough: the environments. In a word, Doom's environments are
so good.
Okay, that's 2 words, but fine. The worlds are varied and inspired. Environmental storytelling works perfectly in unison with motivations of the game's main plot, as opposed to 2016's much smaller assortment of levels. Looking back on Doom 2016, I never thought the levels were great or bad. I didn't really have much to say about them, besides some areas feeling stylistically a bit monotonous. But Doom Eternal's worlds just deliver so much more on all fronts that I feel 2016's Hell Mars repetitions simply pale in comparison to the scope of what's on offer in the sequel. Doom Eternal's level of granular detail is impressive in itself, but the spotlight is really stolen by the vistas and the setting as a whole. Amusingly, this might be one of the only accidental issues you come across when playing Doom Eternal. In a game that necessitates constant movement, there's a high probability players will end up sprinting through these areas without actually being able to fully soak up the richness of the environment. I know that's something other people have picked up on too.
Doom Eternal is such a fast and pulse-pounding game that it's like sprinting through the fucking Louvre. How am I supposed to appreciate the Mona Lisa when it looks like this?
That being said, I think there are several moments throughout that are really designed to catch your eye, and they don't occur as frequently as to be gaudy, like Halo 5's campaign for example, and they don't lock you into a long, unskippable cutscene to kill the pacing. 2016's levels by comparison didn't deliver the same level of grandeur or promote intrigue, and that probably factors in one of the reasons why the story was an afterthought for some and felt like it took a backseat to the gameplay, existing as a conveyor belt to give the player some rough direction on their quest to collect as many imp skulls as possible. You could say that was an intentional design choice. The forefront of Doom games has always been and remains to be its gameplay. I can't think of many other games where you could completely ignore the story and still have a great experience. But the environments from 2016 didn't necessarily do anything to help convey the real scale of what was actually happening in the plot. The fate of a world still hangs in the balance just as it does in Eternal, but it didn't ever really build enough drama to feel like the stakes were that high. While Doom 2016's Mars and Hell based levels are almost aesthetically interchangeable, the same can't be said for the sequel. Including the DLC, you travel between Earth, Hell, the Sentinel and Maker homeworlds respectively numerous times, and on each occasion it feels like a new experience. The enormity of these backdrops are pretty staggering even by today's standards, and while some players are split on whether the addition of platforming segments had benefited the gameplay or stifled it, I think in this instance it lends itself to being able to actually traverse some of these enormous set pieces rather than simply admire them from afar. The second half of Mars Core employs that notion the best, I think. Dashing and grappling across the destroyed base against the expanse of a newly punctured Mars was a standout moment from the campaign. Meanwhile, levels like Hell on Earth, Super Gore Nest, and Final Sin strike a balance between environmental storytelling and impressive overall design. Despite the demonic corruption that engulfs these areas and an expanse of viscera and hellish formations, Earth is still easily recognizable underneath, taking us through city streets, retail stores, subway stations and sewers, rooftop gardens and skyscrapers. It feels, or felt at least, lived in. Urdak is the standout visually. To me, it's a proper aesthetic masterpiece. The environment artists went fucking bananas here. I don't know what they're putting in their coffee, all I know is I want some. The unnatural colour palette and contrast really evokes the feeling of other, helping sell the world as truly alien. It demands a moment from the player to stop and take note, and in this instance, it's earned that right for the opening of the level. These inexplicable off-white monoliths float in stasis against the deep, swirling turquoise of space. The rich gold, magenta colour schemes of the hallways and arenas, right down to the dark crimson red of the foliage. And if all that wasn't impressive enough, they took everything that made Urdak a standout and embellished those details further for the DLC. The Halt is probably the most visually exquisite level in all of Doom Eternal, and definitely amongst the best environments I've come across in a game in recent memory. Whilst capturing the footage for these Doom Redux edits, I probably stopped to use the photo mode on this level the most. There's a moment roughly halfway through, after traversing the forest, that you emerge into something that looks like it could have been designed as a piece of VR artwork. Every degree of vision is crammed with a staggering level of intricacy, taking the familiar architecture from the base game Urdak level, fracturing it, and giving the world a sickly purple tinge as if the life was drained from the world itself. Honestly, I could sit here and look at this thing all day. With all of that said, I know to some people, at least, the levels can feel protracted in places, and depending on your view then, perhaps Doom Eternal could benefit from breaking down its levels into smaller chunks. Personally, however, I think this works to Doom's advantage. If you're collecting everything a level has to offer, you might be there for up to an hour on a single mission. There are few games that I could really say engage me the same way Doom Eternal does. To me, it's not a game I think you can or should burn through at lightning speed in a couple of days, comparable to a Call of Duty campaign. Nowadays, especially in the FPS genre, more often than not when we play a new release, we're instantly familiarized. Within a couple of hours, we'll probably get as good as we're going to be. But although the fundamentals remain unchanged, Doom Eternal sets an expectation of its players to learn its own set of rules back to front if you want to excel. It adds longevity and another layer of depth to the game, and you'll end up with a much richer experience because of it. It's worth noting that all the footage I collected for this video and my other Doom Redux edits was captured on Xbox Series X before the recent next-gen patch, which added ray tracing, reflections, enhanced performance, and DLSS on PC, because of course it did. Only I would go and capture hours of footage for a game to talk about how good it looks right before it receives a visual upgrade. In all seriousness though, I have to commend id Software not only for the impeccable work on their environments and the game as a whole, but also for the inclusion of photo mode. What will seem like an innocuous feature, tucked away in a menu to some, has really given me a bit of a creative jolt in the last couple months while putting these Redux trailers together. And in a way, it's helped me more appreciate some of the beauty hidden in plain sight in the otherwise bloody carnage that is Doom Eternal.